And I don't know about you, but this is something that we've all dealt with here, both, I think, personally, professionally here in our clinic. Obviously, there's a lot of people with fatigue. We're going to touch on COVID today as well, and I think we'll talk about COVID-19 and maybe long COVID-19 syndrome if you want, Dr. Hirsch. We could talk about that. So welcome everyone. Thank you for spending your valuable time with us during lunch, and feel free to eat lunch. Feel free to ask questions. I know we're going to have a lot of questions today about chronic fatigue. We're going to spend the first couple minutes talking about some updates on vaccines and COVID-19. And here's the DC area. Sort of we're in phase 1B, 1C. There are some vaccine effectiveness studies going on now. The Pfizer study showing effectiveness in UK health workers. Another study done in Israel showing 94% effectiveness in patients overall, and basically more after the second dose, of course. But these are kind of correlating with the phase 3 clinical trials that there is some real world effectiveness going on. And then even they also, authors suggested that public health data were suggesting that the Pfizer vaccine is also effective against the UK variant. Another study at Mayo, I shared this with GW. We did a webinar with GW, and so I was researching for them on this. But at Mayo Clinic, Pfizer or Moderna vaccines, and they didn't really say, which one. I think they just kind of lumped them all into one group, were 88.7% effective, and a retrospective analysis of a one-to-one case control, which basically means about 30,000 individuals got the vaccine and 30,000 in that Mayo Clinic health system didn't get the vaccine. They were effective at preventing COVID, basically preventing coronavirus infection. This was a study in fairly high-risk people, people that were seeing patients in terms of healthcare workers and also residents of long-term facilities. The other thing that was interesting about the study is that it did reduce serious infections. So basically, people that had to be admitted to the hospital, they were much less likely to be admitted to the hospital. However, there was also some concern, which I think that's why I want to bring this up today, about what's called variants of concern. Basically, the coronavirus is mutating because viruses do mutate, and they mutate pretty quickly. Their genetic material is not as stable as, for instance, human cells, so they can mutate very easily. And we have variants now in various parts of the country. We have a New York City variant, a California variant. The other ones like the UK, Brazil, and South African variants are also in the US. So they're named after sort of where they originated, but all these are actually in the US now. And some studies have shown that variants might be more transmissible, more severe, and or more evasive in terms of the immune system's ability to neutralize the virus with neutralizing antibodies. So some experts do believe that even though, like in the New England Journal of Medicine, which is a premier medical journal, February 17th, that a reduction in antibody response to the South African variant is not believed by experts to likely affect vaccine effectiveness. One comment I have about that is that we know that regardless of what happens with the variants and vaccine effectiveness, we know that we need to optimize our immune systems. We're going to talk about the immune system today in regards to chronic fatigue as well. So we have Dr. Hirsch today. Great to have you on here, Dr. Hirsch. Later on in this month, we're talking about nutrigenomics with Dr. Williamson and Michelle Gottfried. We also have Dr. Kynes. I'm not sure if you know Cassia, Evan, but she's a doctor of nutrition. It's up in, I think she lives in Vancouver now, but she wrote a book called the Epstein-Barr virus solution. So that's an interesting thing. So we're talking with her in a couple of weeks, and then we're going to have a great Qigong episode with Peter Liebenthal, one of our friends here that's a licensed acupuncturist, at the end of March. So I found this cartoon this morning. This is the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell, and it has muscles just like that, churning out ATP energy, so we can all get up during the day, so that maybe we're not dependent on coffee. I don't know, maybe we are, but this is going to give us our energy so we don't have fatigue. So we're going to talk about mitochondria today. Let's ask a little polling question, if you don't mind. Do you suffer from chronic fatigue? So it could be a yes or no thing. I think there could be gradations of this, of course, but I would say we want to look here at optimal health. We don't want to only look at, I'm not, what's the word, optimal versus just like barely getting off the couch, right? So if you're getting off the couch, you're going to work, or you're doing your things at home, but you don't feel that good, I would say that still would be feeling pretty fatigued. And there's gradations of that. So as people answer this question, just think about how you feel and kind of how you felt maybe earlier in time, let's say, or a time you felt your best, and that's how you want to feel, ideally all the time. So wow. So this is interesting. So yeah, I think more people than not, about three-quarters of people, 78% of people are saying that they're always tired. So definitely, I'm glad you're coming on today, Evan. This is going to be a very fun talk, I think, and we're going to get into some of the root causes of chronic fatigue. I'm very excited about this. So Dr. Hirsch is the author of, he's a medical doctor. He's American board certified by the with integrative medicine, as well as many other accolades that I probably won't say all of them here, but it's functional medicine doctor, has a lot of experience, is a friend of ours here, and as an author of Fix Your Fatigue, which is the 4-step process to resolving chronic fatigue, achieving abundant energy, and reclaiming your life. Oh, Dr. Kogan is also a friend of ours. So yeah, he's on the cover as well, giving the forward there, I think. So, and then
Little
his
DC
website,
love.
DC Love, yes, exactly. So fixyourfatigue.com is Dr. Hirsch's website. And I'm going to stop my share so we can start our Q&A and discussion. So again, Evan or Dr. Hirsch, thank you so much for coming on today.
Dr. Wong, thanks so much for having me on.
Yes. First of all, I want to ask about the sign in your office or room there right behind you that says laugh. Yeah, let's talk about laughter and how that can help the immune system and energy first.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, mindset is a huge part of our health, and it's not focused on enough, and it's a big part of every of the work that I do. And what I learned in the last several years and with my struggle with fatigue about how important it was. And mindfulness is a big part of this, and my wife's a mindfulness coach and a meditation teacher, so it's hard for me not
Nice.
to make sure, I mean, that's the conversations that we have in our home and whatnot.
Nice. That's amazing.
So noticing and paying attention to those things, but then the additional things that are so important that I talk about in creating a daily practice, and one that I do every single morning, is we start off with gratitudes. In one study, 60% reduction in anxiety and depression. And there's been multiple studies just from doing 3 gratitudes every single day. And it can be the same 3 gratitudes,
Ah, okay.
and so oftentimes I'm doing grateful for my wife, grateful for my child, that they're healthy, that they're strong, that
Yeah.
they're happy, grateful for my job, grateful for all the people that I get to help, all my colleagues, whatever it is,
Yeah.
just living in that gratitude. And so that's the first thing. And then the second component of that is envisioning your ideal life.
Mm.
So, what is your life actually? What would it look like if it were exactly how you want it to be? For me, I think I'm in an Airbnb or I'm in a second home and I'm on the beach in Spain, and I wake
Yeah.
up and my wife is there and we go for a run on the beach. We do yoga, we get a juice, we come home. I've got a team that we're helping millions of people resolve their fatigue. So like whatever it is for you, you envision that every day, because there have been studies to show, and there was one about Pianist, which was especially interesting, where the brain really doesn't know the difference between reality and fantasy. And this is one of the reasons also why, when you're watching TV, if your heart rate is going up and stuff like that because you're watching a
Yeah.
horror flick, like your body doesn't know the difference. You're still
Right.
releasing the same stress hormones. And
Run
so
away
in
from that
this
tiger, right? Yeah.
exactly. So in this same study, in this study that they did at Harvard on these pianists, they saw that those who practiced in their minds versus those who actually practiced on the piano, their performances were the same except for muscle memory. So it's just another great
Okay, got it.
show of the fact that you can really transform your life by, and so when you're thinking about your energy and you're thinking about fatigue, what does your energy look like in the future? And this can be a year from now, 5 years from now, whatever. So that's visioning. So that's the second component. I'm just diving into mindset, if that's all right, because we're talking about
Yeah.
laughing. We'll come back to that in a second. The next component is going to be empowering beliefs, looking at what your limiting beliefs are that are holding you back in life, those things that you tell yourself that maybe somebody else had told you along the way that you've incorporated that are not serving you, and flipping them on their head and saying, okay, well, what are these empowering beliefs? So for me growing up, it was, there's not enough time, there's not enough money, everything has to happen now or otherwise something bad's going to happen. And
Yeah.
so I flipped that on its head. There's always enough time, there's always enough money, there's always enough for everything that I want to do in life. And then the last part of this is living by from empowering questions. asking yourself empowering questions during the day. Too many of us are saying, why is this happening to me? Especially during the time of the pandemic.
Yeah.
Instead of asking a better question is, how can I, love my family even more?
Yeah, that's huge. No, that's
How can I be the best version of myself? How can I use this time wisely
huge.
and really be better off at the end of this pandemic than I was when it started?
Right.
So the laugh sign is really a component of that. Laughter, singing, that's another thing that I like to do,
Yeah.
that are so beneficial for the body, improving immune system response and function and balance, decreasing stress. There are just the benefits are numerous.
We've had a sound healer on here, and she was talking about how that's activating the heart chakra, throat chakra, just different parts. And obviously, we know that it activates the vagus nerve. It sends that message of safety when you're laughing, but also when you're singing, chanting, and meditating, all these things. So the mindset is huge. I totally agree. I couldn't agree more. Those are great components. I hope people are taking notes because I'm going to ask people later. Talking with you here. So yeah, so mindsets of gratitude and certainly the other things that you had said too make a lot of sense. How does someone know if they have fatigue?
It's a great question
Yeah.
because, as humans, we're very adaptable. We think that oftentimes when our energy starts to go down, it's because we're getting older. And
Mhm.
that's definitely not the truth.
Right. You
The
go to the
truth,
doctor and they just say, yeah, you're just getting older, right?
you're just getting older. Here's an antidepressant,
Right.
right?
Right.
So that's really unfortunate when that happens. But the reality is that you get hits throughout your life. If you picture your life like a rain barrel, and
Hmm.
you're thinking about all of the toxicities or the stressors that you have throughout your life, they accumulate over time and eventually they overflow, and that's when you get symptoms.
Hmm.
So what we want to do is we want to get in there and we want to start hoisting and getting all that crap out of the barrel and then poke a hole in the bottom, open that up, and so you can relieve that as well. And these stressors can be mental, emotional, spiritual, physical. I mean, it can be, a divorce when you were 7, or rejection of a peer group.
Yeah.
There's something called ACEs, or adverse childhood events, that I know you're familiar with,
Right.
where basically anything less than nurturing
Hmm.
that happened to you when you were younger. It doesn't have to be any sort of severe form of abuse, physical, mental, emotional, sexual, whatever it is. It can be rejection of a peer group, which is something that I had that changed the way that I looked at the world and made me more fearful.
Yeah.
It can be, father loses a job, mom loses a job, somebody gets sick,
I'm talking about
whatever it
ages.
is.
And what age are we talking about here? What like as long as the brain's developing or when?
It can be any time in your life.
So ACEs are because it says adverse childhood experiences, but people can have it at 30, 40, 50. It's kind of like any adverse event. I guess they're just called adverse events or trauma in a way. It's the ACEs are more like they happen in childhood. It might be even more powerful because the brain's still developing a little bit more.
Well, I think you raise a good point, because I think you're absolutely right. It's things are You're going to imprint a lot more at a younger age, but any sort of traumatic thing that you don't deal with appropriately, or
Mhm.
it changes the way that you look
Yeah,
at the world, the way that
yeah,
you look at yourself, the way you look at relationships, is going to be unhealthy, and it's going to increase your risk for chronic illness.
Now, how does stress emotionally? Because I think we can tell from functional medicine that physical stress is going to cause inflammation, decreased mitochondria, that's going to cause fatigue. How does emotional trauma, psychological stress, or psychological trauma cause fatigue? What's
So
the connection there?
yeah, so there are a number of different things that end up happening. I think the most important thing has to do with dysfunction of cortisol.
Hmm.
So the adrenal gland is a little small triangular gland that sits on top of the kidneys and produces a number of hormones, the most important of which is cortisol. Cortisol is your get up and go hormone, which is if you're tired, most of the time it's got up and went. It also regulates the immune system. It regulates insulin and blood sugars.
Hmm.
It manages other hormones. But its most important function really is dealing with stress, whether it's mental, emotional, or physical stressors. And what ends up happening is that you're producing this cortisol, and then you also have adrenaline, which is kind of in the middle part of the adrenal gland. And so you're producing the adrenaline. And when you're producing adrenaline as well, oftentimes you're going to get anxiety. Okay. Another component of this is, as you're dealing with stress and as you're producing this cortisol, you are undergoing neurosculpting. So essentially you're bathing your brain in cortisol
Mm.
and in stress, and you're
It
changing the brain, and you're
doesn't
changing the
sound like
way.
doesn't sound like a nice bath. Yeah, it's
That's
too
right.
much.
It's a bit of a toxic bath for sure.
Toxicity bath.
Yeah. And so then that is changing the way that the brain is functioning, the way the brain is thinking.
Yeah,
And so consequently, you are going from having prolonged stress of any kind, you're going to get dysfunction in everything that's supposed to be managed by cortisol. So whether that's the immune system, whether that's going to be insulin and blood sugars, whether that's the brain and its functioning, whether that's all the other hormone function and your
right.
reaction to the world, that just accumulates. And there are a number of other components as well in terms of like specifics in the brain, like with the limbic system and
Mm,
whatnot,
yeah,
where there's certain parts of the brain that get stuck in the on position where you're
yeah,
always in fight or flight.
right.
But that's kind of a general overview.
Yeah, and we know that cortisol, even when there's chronic elevation of cortisol because of stress, whether it's physical or psychological stress, that may even lead to cortisol receptor resistance. So where the cortisol receptors essentially are saying, hey, you know what? I'm tired of this too much toxic soup. So then the adrenals trying to produce more cortisol, and then that also almost like augments that stress.
Right.
I
And
think
then they run out of cortisol,
right,
and then that's when people really crash their energy.
right. So you had talked about, and I think your book here, what is there's a level one problem. So, but you want to talk about like what I'm not familiar with this. If you could explain this to myself and everyone here, what is a level one problem, and what are the three levels of fatigue? So we can talk about severity, I think, first.
Yeah, absolutely. So it really has to do with what treatments work. So a level one problem is fatigue that's relieved with lifestyle habit changes.
Okay.
So you sleep more, you eat better, you drink more water, you get more
Mhm.
movement. So if you do those things and your fatigue is resolved, then that's considered a level one problem. If you need to take supplements, so to replace the deficiencies, and one of the things we'll talk about in a minute is these causes of fatigue. And
Mm.
so they're broken up into deficiencies and toxicities.
Okay.
So if you start to replace the deficiencies in hormones and nutrients and mitochondria and all that sort of stuff, by taking those supplements and your fatigue is resolved, that was a level two problem. If you still have fatigue at that point, that's considered a level three problem because you've got toxicities that are present: heavy metals, chemicals, molds, infections, allergies, negative emotional patterns, electromagnetic
Would
fields.
gut infections also be in level three, like dysbiosis, things like that?
Absolutely. Yep.
And it's sort of they stack on top of each other. Is that correct? So you would always want to start with level one, and even if you're at level two or three, you'd have to make sure you optimize the lifestyle in level one concurrently with level two and three treatments.
Absolutely. Now it really depends on the person and what they're able to do.
Okay.
Because sometimes
Yep.
changing diets,
Yep.
drinking more water, like
We all
some of
know how
those
hard that
things,
can be, right?
right,
Right.
it can be really hard. So actually in my program, I have people, because when people are joining my program, their fatigue is pretty bad.
Mm,
It's at least generally a 5 out of 10, where 10 is ideal energy. And so it's hard to get out of bed in the morning. It's hard to do what you need to do just to get through your day, just to
yeah.
work a job. So what I have people is I have them start with the supplements first and replace the supplements that are specific to them, and
Mhm.
then we come back to the lifestyle stuff and dial it in. Now, the sleep stuff might be a little bit easier, like going to bed on time. So we're kind of incorporating some of
Some
that.
low hanging fruit. Yeah.
Yeah,
You're optimizing mitochondria so they can have the energy to do the lifestyle changes.
exactly.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. And what are the main causes of fatigue in your experience with working with patients?
So I have found that there's 10 causes of fatigue, and they can be broken up into the deficiencies and the toxicity. So deficiencies are things that are not in the body that are supposed to be in there, and toxicities are things that are in the body that are not supposed to be in there. So the deficiencies are things like hormone deficiencies. Like we
Mhm.
talked about with chronic stress, you're going to get deficiencies in the adrenals, and consequently then dysfunction and deficiencies in thyroid and sex
Right.
hormones. Deficiencies in nutrients like vitamins, vitamin B12, vitamin D, minerals like iron and magnesium, um,
Yeah.
deficiencies in neurotransmitters, so serotonin, dopamine, etc. Deficiencies in lifestyle habits. So this is kind of where those fit in, not enough sleep, not enough water, not enough good food, not enough movement.
Hmm.
And then deficiencies and dysfunction in mitochondria, which is 70 to 80% of the energy that we produce is in this mitochondria, which is found in every single cell in the body except for red blood cells. And it produces, like you mentioned, ATP, which is incredibly important for our overall function. Now, interestingly enough, when we go through our 4-step process, you're going to hear about why we replace deficiencies first. But a lot of these deficiencies are actually caused, some of them are genetic, but a lot of them are caused by the toxicities,
Hmm.
because the
Yeah.
toxicities end up damaging and causing excess stress, smashing that mitochondria. So you
Yeah.
have to pull them off of the mitochondria in addition to injecting some good love into the
Yeah.
mitochondria.
So good stuff in the mitochondria, the nutrients, the vitamins, the lifestyle, and then extracting. It's almost like an oil spill cleanup, right? Like I don't know if that makes
It
sense,
is.
but
That's good, yeah.
I remember the Exxon Valdez, right? It's like kind of like that. Now, what toxins are you talking about here? Or what kind of toxins what might we be exposed to in our lives?
So let's go through them. So heavy metals, 100,000 pounds of mercury are dumped into our oceans every year. So anything we're consuming from the oceans and from the air, we're going to be getting a lot of that in. 70% of all lipsticks have lead in them. So there's just a lot of heavy metals that we're exposed to on a regular basis.
Hmm.
When we look at chemicals and chemical toxicity, we're exposed to about 84,000 different chemicals per year. Most of those haven't been appropriately studied by government and other scientific bodies for their safety, or at least we're not being appropriately counseled on which ones that we're supposed to
That
avoid.
will be an entire another hour in terms of why they're not policing it as much, right? Chemicals, but yeah.
That's true. We're just going to drop a little bit of that in there. Just, be aware, realize you're not getting all the information. But, anything that you put on your face, there's a number of, good sites. Actually, the best one is Environmental Working Group, or ewg.org/skin deep, DEEP.
And Jen, if you could put that on the chat, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's a great site for determining whether or not what you're putting, your cosmetics and whatnot, your shampoos, what you're putting on your body rather, is toxic. So
Yeah.
that's an important one. And then pesticides and herbicides. If you're not consuming 100% organic, like all of us, you go out to eat, you're not going to be getting organic, right? You
Right.
have to be aware that you are going to be getting some pesticides. When I was driving cross country back in my youth and I had a hot water bottle next to me filled with water and I was drinking it. That's why I had so many plastics in my body.
Oh, got it.
So, and I had pretty much all of these causes as we're going through. When I had fatigue for 5 years, it just about destroyed my life. It was
Yeah.
because I had pretty much all of these causes.
Can we take a step into that if you don't mind? You had fatigue for 5 years. How did you figure out what to do? Like, was there some mentor that you talked to, doctor, practitioner, or did you figure it out on your own? How did you figure all that out for yourself?
Yeah. So I tried to find people to help me, and I think Jacob Teitelbaum's book on
Yep.
fatigue to fantastic was probably the best that I found at that
Great book.
time,
Yeah.
but
Yep.
it only got me to a certain point.
Yep.
It doesn't cover all of the causes that I ended up finding afterwards. So I got to a certain point, and then I was like, okay, I'm not all the way better. What do I need to do next? So
Hmm.
that's when I started reading every book that I could on fatigue and attending every conference, and reading Harrison's again for fatigue, and anything that remotely affected energy and remotely affected fatigue, I started incorporating and testing for in my body, in myself, and then in other people as well. And the big part of this is the environmental medicine component. I found that I had to go outside of functional medicine
Yeah.
and study more about environmental medicine with different people. I did,
I'm getting into that
train.
now. Yeah, I think it's so important. Yeah.
Yeah. I
So
did different trainings with people on
yeah.
Lyme and the different co-infections.
Yeah.
Mold was a big component of this, and then the heavy metals and chemicals, and
It's
having the
been a
right tools to
personal
get over
journey,
them.
but I think that's so key that you've experienced it yourself and been able to fix your own fatigue, right? I mean, that's a huge thing when you work with people, as having gone through it yourself is really big. And it sounds like you've had to kind of figure it out on your own in some ways. It's just some answers are there and some you have to figure out on your own. So a lot of causes of fatigue, and I think we can go to another question here is, Well, why is
Wait,
it so?
wait. We only did heavy metals and chemicals.
Oh,
Can I
I'm
do the
sorry.
other
I'm
ones
sorry.
real quick?
Okay, okay. Got on the environmental tangent. Yeah. Yeah.
So
So
I'll do
there's
the
more. There's more toxins. Okay, got it.
yeah, I'll do them quickly so we can make
Yeah,
sure we
sure. No,
touch on
it's fine.
everything
Yeah,
else.
yeah, we're good. Yeah.
So yeah, so heavy metals, chemicals, and then mold. So
Mold.
50% of all the buildings in first world countries have water damage, and most of those have mold. So 50%, incredibly sinister, incredibly nebulous, hard to find. Not a lot of people want to accept it because they think it's really expensive in order to fix it and whatnot. Sometimes it can be, but there's so much that you can do. But
Yeah.
having that awareness is huge. It's such an important part of this process.
Yeah. Yeah.
So heavy metals, chemicals, molds, and then infections, whether it's gut infections with yeast and bacteria and parasites, whether it's Lyme and Lyme co-infections like Bartonella and Babesia, and we'll talk more about how to assess these things by symptoms in just a couple of minutes.
Okay.
Epstein-Barr virus, like I know you're talking about with my good friend, Dr. Kashik Hines, in a couple
Yeah.
of weeks. That's
Awesome.
going to be great.
Yeah.
Other viruses like COVID-19, I'm starting to see a lot more people with long haulers, unfortunately, long COVID.
Yeah. If
I
we have
think
time, we'd love to delve into your take on the long hauler COVID syndrome. That
absolutely.
great. So thank you for
Wait,
that.
I'm not done. I'm not done.
Oh, I'm
So
sorry. I didn't.
heavy metals,
See,
chemicals,
that's why
molds,
there's more. Okay.
molds, infections, allergies, so food
Allergies.
allergies
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
inhaled allergies,
Okay.
negative emotional patterns,
Oh, wow. Okay.
and then electromagnetic fields.
Oh,
I think
wow.
that's all
That's
of
like
them. So
everything. It's totally. And in a way, I mean, honestly, we're probably all exposed to all those on a, if not daily basis, certainly a regular basis. And that's so comprehensive. That's probably the most comprehensive list I've heard about toxicity. Because often in medicine, we often focus on, let's focus on the mold, or let's focus on the Lyme, or let's focus on, someone has gut issues. But in a way, we may all be exposed to all these things. So how do you parse out what to treat first? Even among, so if someone has like five things, right?
right. Well, and what I found is of those 10 things, those 10 categories, everybody's got something from each of those categories.
Right. So
And
then
so
how do you prioritize, like, if they have 10 things, negative emotional patterns, gut issues, Lyme, mold, chemicals, where do you begin? Right.
so let's go into my 4-step process because I think that'll answer the question.
Yeah. Great.
So the first step is assessing all of the causes that somebody has. And so we do this by symptoms more than labs. So what I found is that 75% of these causes can be determined by symptoms alone. So in that first visit or in our program where you have a workbook, you can print it out, you can start going through it, and within the first hour or two, you're going to know 75% of your causes just based off of the symptoms.
Hmm.
And then you're also going to know which ones you really need the labs for. So that's the first step. And then based off of that, then we go into replacing the deficiencies, because even though this process is all about step 4 and removing the toxicities, you have to start feeling better fast,
Yeah.
right? It's great for so many things, and everything works better when you started replacing a number of these things. So we start off first with the big 3, which is adrenal support, mitochondrial support, and thyroid support. And what I found is that everybody needs adrenal and mitochondrial support,
Hmm.
and then a lot of people still need thyroid support, but thyroid will actually improve by working on the adrenals and the mitochondria.
That makes sense.
So then we go into those other components of deficiencies that people have, whether it's neurotransmitters or whether it's, at that point, the lifestyle habits. Hopefully that's something that they're able to jump into, other vitamins, minerals, nutrients. So we're boosting those things up. And then in step 3, we're starting to open up the detoxification pathways. So in step 4, when we're grabbing a toxin and we're pulling it from the tissues, which are like the organs and whatnot outside the bloodstream, pulling them into the bloodstream, they have to have a place to go. Otherwise, what happens is that they just go back into another compartment, right?
Yeah.
And so we have to open up these pathways of detoxification. This is one of the major problems that I see with folks who are practicing and not doing this step, is that, and especially with like Lyme docs, where they think that people have to suffer through Herxheimer's reactions and
Mhm.
die off. And we want people to have just a little bit so we know something's happening, but not enough so that it's causing so much
So
stress
it
and
sounds like that
dysfunction in
no
the
pain,
body.
no gain is kind of outdated. That whole
It's very outdated. Yeah, for sure.
right. And that's a little tangent, but that whole no pain, no gain thing. When someone's having no pain or no gain, they're exercising. Mitochondrial uncoupling is going on. So you mean, right? Basically, what that means is you can under-exercise and be too sedentary, and that's not good. But you also can over-exercise, which damages the mitochondria in a way. And so
That's
that whole no pain no gain, you want to have some discomfort maybe when you're exercising, stretching the muscles, but not enough to where it becomes a long recovery or damage, injury, and stuff. So that's just a little bit of a. So even from a Herxheimer reaction point of view, it sounds like that's also the case. You don't necessarily want someone to go through a detox reaction where they're suffering, having a lot of symptoms, because that might be damaging the mitochondria there.
exactly. And it's inevitable, but we don't want it to be a lot.
Okay.
We want it to be a gentle process, and we always want it to be 5 steps forward, 1 step back. I mean, it would be great if it was just 5 steps forward and you just kept going, but there's
Right.
always nuances to this, especially when you're dealing with infections, where that's where the communication is so important, and why your people love you is because they can contact you and they can figure out what's going on. You can give them advice in the moment, and then they can pivot and they can continue to move forward and get another 5 steps.
So even I'm kind of, I mean, there's a lot of info here. So please just repeat for us the 4 step. What are the main 4 steps? I know that was the one thing. What are kind of the just overview? What are the main 4 steps of the fix your fatigue system?
Yeah, so step one is to assess all the causes that you have,
Okay.
symptoms primarily, and then you can always do the labs later. Second step is to replace the deficiencies, those
Mhm.
deficiencies we talked about that are not in the body that are supposed to be. Third step is opening up the detoxification pathways, making sure you're pooping, making sure liver, kidneys, lymph, which is the garbage system of the body, are all open.
Yeah, and then 4. Okay, so
And four is removing the toxicities.
so really the opening of the pathways, that totally makes sense. Yeah, I do see that in a lot of patients too. It's like sometimes the detox pathways can be opened up first before we do that step 4 kind of process the toxicity. And then we have a question about just if you could repeat the 10 causes again, just because I know we kind of got sidetracked. I interrupted you a couple times. I apologize for that. I didn't realize we had not gone through all the causes, but yeah, let's talk about that one more time.
Absolutely. Yeah. And sometimes my Jersey comes out, so I apologize to start talking real fast.
No, it's great. Yeah. Thanks.
So yes, so let's do that. And then I didn't entirely answer your question, so I do want to come back to that one in just a second. So the 10 causes, we're looking at the deficiencies and the toxicities. So we're looking at deficiencies in hormones and vitamins, minerals. So those are nutrients,
Okay.
and mitochondria and lifestyle habits, neurotransmitter deficiencies, and then the toxicities in heavy metals, chemicals, molds, infections, allergies, negative emotional patterns, and electromagnetic fields. I think that's 10. There might be a little bit more than
That's
that,
more
but
than
that's
10, but yeah, it's kind of like the alphabet. There's probably, the number, how many planets are in the solar system now, right? Um, but I think the causes are really interrelated. So I want to get to this question to make sure. What is the relationship between those causes that you mentioned, either deficiencies or toxicities, and the long hauler COVID syndrome or other flus? What is the question here from Gwendy is about other viruses like H1N1. So like, people get a virus, it could be a COVID, it could be Epstein-Barr, even sometimes flus, it's like people don't feel good after a while. So how do you connect the dots between like a long haul COVID syndrome? I think maybe just say what that is first. I'm not sure if everyone knows what that is, but long haul COVID syndrome and then versus some of the causes, how do they interact?
Yeah, so long haulers I think the NIH just came out with the term 2 days ago. I think PCAS, I think it's post-acute COVID, no, post-COVID acute syndrome. I think that's what they're
There's
talking
always
about.
got to be some fancy
There's got to
acronym,
be some, yeah. But basically it means you had COVID,
Mhm.
and sometimes the symptoms are not severe. Usually the people who get long haulers actually have the more mild symptoms. So you get
Oh,
COVID, you think it goes away,
yeah.
but then it comes back, or you get it and it never goes away. So you
Okay.
continuously having symptoms, and oftentimes you get the symptoms you started off with are not the symptoms that you have now, and they're rotating. And the symptoms that you had before are are better, but the newer symptoms are worse. And sometimes you're accumulating new symptoms as you go
I have
on,
a question
and they're
about that.
usually like
Is
mystery
this
symptoms.
post-COVID syndrome, is this thought to be the virus is still somewhere in the body intracellularly or whatnot, or is it more like post-inflammation and mitochondrial damage and stuff. What is the pathophysiology, I guess, of these kind of post-viral syndromes?
It's a great question. And the thinking initially, that was the question initially, but there was a recent study that was done for people who were asymptomatic. So they had COVID, they got over it, they no longer had symptoms, and they did intestinal biopsies on these people 4 months later.
Hmm.
So no symptoms.
Okay.
They think they're completely healed.
Okay.
And half of them, 50% of them, had live active COVID-19 virus in this intestinal biopsy.
Wow.
So I would imagine that all of those people who are long haulers, 100% of those, I'm sure, have live virus. And this is kind of what we see with Epstein-Barr virus as well, seeing
Hmm.
reactivation. So it'll be very interesting to ask Dr. Kynes about that when you talk to her.
Yes,
Um,
I will for sure. And are they, and maybe we don't know this yet, but are those patients with, are those people with long haul COVID, are if they're carriers of active virus, in theory, they could reinfect others? I mean, what is the thought on that right now?
Absolutely. There was a study that was done on military recruits, and
Hmm.
they did two separate quarantines. They did a quarantine at home for 2 weeks, and then they did a quarantine on base for 2 weeks. Then they took them through a program, and 35% of them got COVID. So the asymptomatic individuals are still
Oh, they're
carriers.
still
So
carrying. Got it.
even if you don't feel like that you are, that you're not sick and you don't think that you're able to transmit it to other people, you are, even if you don't have any symptoms. So
Yeah.
yes, the numbers for asymptomatic carriers is really high.
Yeah, no, that's huge. I wonder, yeah, I mean, just kind of, we'll go back to the questions in a minute, but I'm wondering if the T cell response from, either getting a vaccine or getting a natural infection would be enough to prevent this from becoming an endemic virus like we see with influenza. Like, in other words, if a bunch of people are carrying it now, right, we know that there's a likely an underestimation of the prevalence of COVID.
Right.
The prevalent, so I think it was like 7% of people have gotten COVID. It's probably more now, but then there's been some studies to say that up to 6 times that many people actually have gotten it already and are just like asymptomatic. And they might be those gut carriers that are just sitting there with active coronavirus replicating in the gut, but it's just the immune system is strong enough to just kind of, I guess, just to control it essentially.
Yeah. I'm not sure what the question was in there, but I agree.
Well, I guess the question is, I guess the question is more of a broad, very vague question, I think. Maybe it's not well worded, but I think it's about sort of what is the future of our society? Like
Oh yeah.
how are we gonna deal with all this stuff,
And this kind of comes back to the question that you asked about the causes of long haulers, is that the causes are actually the same. I mean, besides the virus, the
Hmm.
causes are all those same causes that I mentioned. And this is the reason why people are having such a hard time, because it's society is so toxic right now, and our exposures to different toxins is damaging our DNA and upending our immune system. And then in comes COVID. And not only is it acting as a virus, but it also is a bit of a biofilm disruptor, where it's starting to allow other bugs to come
Mm.
out
Oh, I
and
see.
become more
Yeah.
opportunistic. Because what we're seeing is that sometimes these weird symptoms are
Yeah.
not from COVID at all, but they're actually
Yeah.
COVID unmasking Bartonella or
Got
unmasking
it. And
Babesia.
yeah, and we had a question earlier about, and I didn't ask it yet, so we'll ask it now from Jill about does biofilm does biofilm play a role in chronic fatigue syndrome? I think you just answered that. It sounds like yes, for sure.
Absolutely, but you have to be very careful about how you approach it, because if you're breaking up biofilm, which is basically a hiding place for all of these bugs,
Hmm.
or a lot of the bugs, and you're not ready to address it because you haven't killed off a number of the bugs already, or
Mm.
that you're taking, a large amount of a particular antimicrobial, and then all of a sudden you're going to double the amount of infection that is now available to that antimicrobial, you're going to get a whole ton of Herxheimer reaction, die-off reaction, and you're not going to feel good at all, and it's going to damage your mitochondria and your adrenals.
So I think if I understood you correctly, treating infections in a more gradual way and then opening to the biofilm in a gradual way would be better than like just doing a shotgun thing where it's like, just treating everything all at one time and, causing almost like too much toxicity, essentially. from
Absolutely. Yeah. It's the same idea where you're kind of dumping that if you're trying to
right.
pull the toxicity into your bloodstream to get it out of the body, you're just going to feel worse if you haven't done the groundwork.
That makes total sense. Yeah. Great. All right. I'm going to get some questions now. So we have a question about this is a great question. How does one maximize adrenal function with only one adrenal? Like if someone had an adrenal tumor or something like that, they had it taken out surgically, they have one adrenal. Does that affect adrenal function? What's the thought on that?
It definitely does. I mean, there can be, one healthy adrenal is going to be better than two unhealthy adrenals.
Hmm.
So, all the stuff that you can do is still going to be beneficial. But yes, you have two because you do need some support with that because of the stress that we have in our life as humans. So, and I believe that everybody who lives in our society today needs adrenal support and needs mitochondrial support. But you just have to be a little bit extra diligent, make sure you're taking those things, making sure that you are your lifestyle habits are really good. You're going to sleep at the right time, you're drinking enough water, you're prioritizing stress management techniques, you're working on your mindset, you're doing some meditation, like whatever it is that you're doing
Yeah.
with
Do
Dr.
you
Wong, you
feel
want
like
to make sure you're doing
everyone, um, Dr. Hirsch, do you feel like everyone needs adrenal support? Definitely lifestyle makes for sure. Also supplements, are you finding that people need the supplementation, like kind of like everyone's in stage two at this point or for
I do.
adrenal and yeah.
Yeah, I definitely
And
believe
there's
that.
different, and do you like, this is a little bit more of a functional medicine question, but do you typically like the more herbals or like, do you like the glandulars there? What do you like for the adrenal supplements and everything?
I like the herbals. It's been interesting because I really do want to like the glandulars because I like glandulars for thyroid and that works
Mhm.
really well, ramping up on those. But for some reason, the glandulars have not worked well for the adrenals. And I think it has to do with the fact that, it's not always about boosting the adrenals. Sometimes it's just about balancing the
Yeah.
adrenals.
Yeah.
Sometimes levels are
Herbals
too
are better at
high.
that. Sure.
And
Yeah.
herbals are better at that. Yeah. So I'm a fan of herbal combinations. Siberian ginseng is my favorite one for kind
Nice.
of boosting and keeping things strong. But there's a number of others, holy basil and ashwagandha, and a couple of those that I like to use that are adaptogenic.
They're all adaptogenic, really herbs that build resilience, right? All those herbs had to grow out in cold weather and fight off bugs and stuff. Right?
Right.
Just imagine Siberia, right? I mean, the ginseng's got to be pretty good up there.
Hardy.
Hardy,
Yeah.
it's a hardy ginseng. Okay, so Elaine has, this is great. How do you test for mold? I guess there's many ways to test for mold. What are your favorite ways?
So it brings up a very good point. So I tell people I've got a video in my program that goes into if there was one test that you have to do that you need to spend the money on, it's to determine whether or not you're living in mold.
Hmm.
And this is the ERMI test.
Okay.
ERMI, the Environmental Relative Moldiness Index. You can
Mhm.
purchase it in the United States at mycometrics.com. That's mycometrics.com. And that is a DNA test for mold. So the mold plates can be helpful at determining like if it's in a particular room, but they only test for mold spores. There are things called mycotoxins, which are produced by the mold that are also important to determine. And that's where you want to do this DNA test, which is the ERMI. So the ERMI can tell you if there's mold in your home or your work or your car, or whatever space that you're testing, but it
Mhm.
won't tell you exactly where it is. So then following it up with like the mold plates to determine that can oftentimes be helpful while you're determining if you need to remediate. But in terms of testing in the body, the best test is the urine mycotoxin test. And I really like the one through Great Plains Laboratory. I think
Mhm.
that they
Yeah,
do
it's
a
a good
really
one.
nice job.
Yeah.
And the reason why, and so this is really a two-step process. You have to make sure, are you living in mold? And if you are, you need to get out of it. And
Mhm.
then do you have mold in your body? And if you do, then you need to remove it.
Right. Sometimes people have moved out of their apartment or house a while back, but they've been still having chronic fatigue and sinus issues, allergies, a bunch of, autoimmunity. But, lo and behold, they had like a water damaged building like 10 years ago or something, 5 years ago. So then they're still living with that mold in their body, even though they have a pristine apartment now or a pristine house now, no mold in the house, but it's still in the body. So that is something that we have to look at, that functional medicine timeline, and, look at all that. Crystal, welcome, Crystal. So basically you mentioned toxicity in foods from the ocean. we certainly know that ocean foods can be healthy, in terms of there's always that, what can I eat now? The whole world is toxic, right? They're good sources of long chain fatty acids like omega-3 fatty acids, which we know decrease inflammation, and in theory it decreases autoimmunity. But given that the ocean is toxic now, and we know that there's mercury and everything, dioxins, etc., in a lot of the foods, should we avoid certain ocean foods, is Crystal's question.
Absolutely. I pretty much avoid all ocean foods. I think
Yeah.
the only ocean foods that I would consume are the small ones. So the bigger the fish, the more heavy metals, the more mercury is going to be in there because it gets stored in the fat. So
Mm,
swordfish and tuna are some of the biggest, and they're some of the most toxic. The EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, which is a relatively conservative organization. I remember when I was going through medical school, it was, there's not a problem with pregnant women eating tuna. And then when I was in residency, it was, well, they should eat it maybe 4 times a month. And then when I graduated residency, they said, I think it went to like once a week, once a month, and then it went to like no more.
maybe their board
So,
of directors is changing, and then it's like the people that are more up to date with it. I don't know.
right. I mean, it's all, it's based off the research and the amount of mercury that babies were being exposed to in the womb. And
Yeah.
so, anchovies and sardines are really the only fish that I recommend consuming. Occasionally, I mean, I live in the Pacific Northwest, so
Yeah.
occasionally we're going to get some salmon, but it's really infrequent. And oftentimes I will, take a binder with it or right after it, or
Yeah.
something to kind of make sure that
I
I'm
mean,
not
in
I'm not
theory, the
toxifying
selenium
myself.
in the salmon might be able to detox the mercury. I don't know how you feel about that.
Heard about
It's a
that.
relatively lower mercury fish, at least compared to a tuna or a swordfish or something like that. But yeah, we should probably establish an ocean in Salt Lake City, right? That's probably what we need to establish. Like, get a little fishery out there, do some real salt, out there
Well, the
with.
problem is like, I mean, I guess, yeah, we're decreasing our coal plants, but it's mainly, coal plants that are producing the mercury vapor, and then that's
Oh,
settling into the water,
okay. I see. Got it. All right. I guess another strike against
right? Some more
coal.
good news. Yeah.
Right.
But yeah, but then you do want to get your omega-3s, but I believe that the best way to do that is in a supplement form where where it's been third party tested and
Right.
all the
So they
excipients,
don't have
including the
mercury and
mercury, have
stuff.
been
Yeah,
removed.
great. All right. Well, Carrie asked about autoimmune issues, and we know that autoimmune issues are often related to fatigue. There's this immune fatigue dyad or something, or connection. So she was talking about what about autoimmune issues like RA, which is rheumatoid arthritis. How does that cause fatigue? I think is the question. Let me see if there's more from that. Carrie, if you have anything else to say about that. I mean, certainly immune system issues can cause fatigue for sure.
Yeah, so it turns out really interestingly that the causes of fatigue are very similar to the causes of autoimmunity. All those toxicities that I talked about, they are all the causes of autoimmunity. And everybody who has fatigue also has autoimmunity. They just may not have been diagnosed with it yet. But basically, anything that's in the body that's not supposed to be in the body, it's the immune system's job to remove it from the body. So the immune system starts attacking it, starts trying to gobble it up and remove it out of the body. But for a lot of these toxicities, they get inside the cell, they get inside the organs, and the immune system is coming after those toxicities, and it has to go through the cell, go through the organ in order to get to it. So it's attacking the different parts of the body where these toxicities are positioned. So if the if the toxicity is in the joints, then you're going to get rheumatoid arthritis. If the toxicity is in the
Wow, that's
skin, you're
interesting.
going to get
Yeah,
lupus. So there's a couple different theories about this, because there's also the molecular mimicry idea, but this
right.
is the way that I believe that it's happening from
And
the
you would
research
consider,
and
I think,
whatnot that
right,
I've seen.
allergens and food sensitivities and things are also toxins. And we're talking about toxins. We're not just talking about like soot or something like, from a coal plant, but we are talking about that. We're talking about heavy metals, pesticides, and other environmental chemicals. Infections are also toxins. These are all things, like you said, Dr. Hirsch, that it's like they're not supposed to be in our body. So then our immune system, it sounds like, is attacking our cells and causing autoimmune disease or autoimmune conditions as a result of collateral damage, essentially, right? The body's trying
Absolutely.
to get rid of those toxins, but while trying to do that, it's also at the same time kind of harming some innocent bystanders there, which is ourselves.
Yeah, it's just trying to do its job.
Yeah.
the immune system. And it just so happens that in order to get rid of the toxins, there is collateral damage. It does damage the tissues. And so that's why I've seen when I remove heavy metals, chemicals, molds, and infections foremost, for some reason, with a lot of these autoimmune conditions, that you can get rid of them. The person who's on a cane, you get rid of their infection, and then
That's
they
so.
can
So
run a
I heard you
marathon.
say. I think I caught that. You said. I heard you say the infections are foremost. Does that mean in your practice so far, you found, hey, this is kind of one of the main triggers for people?
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Infections are a huge part of this, but they're not operating on their own. And when you have infections, it's always because you have heavy metals, chemicals, and or molds that have taken the immune system and gone off into left field, and the bugs become opportunistic.
Yeah.
Because in this human form, we're 90% bug cells and 10% human cells, which always
Right.
blows people's minds. So it's not about the infection not already being there, because most of the time it's already there. Or you get COVID-19 and there are people who don't have any symptoms. Why is that? Because they don't have these other things that have hijacked the immune system that
Mhm.
then allows the COVID to become more opportunistic.
That's
If the
key. The
immune
disease,
system
right?
is keeping things in check, then you're
Yeah.
good.
So you have to have a strong immune system, a balanced immune system. Great. We do have a question about chelation therapy. I don't know if you did that in your bricks and mortar clinic. Dr. Hirsch is doing a lot of virtual work now online with his amazing platform for fixing fatigue. We do some IV chelation here for toxicity related to lead. We'll do some oral DMSA or different binders and things, clay charcoal, things like that. We do recommend people do sauna sometimes too for metals. I guess, have you ever used or know of people that do chelation therapy for heavy metals, and how do you open detox pathway for chelation, whether it's IV or oral, I think is the question.
Yeah. So I think that, whenever you're using pharmaceutical, whether it's IV, whether it's oral, you just have to be that much more careful, which is why you guys are in the good hands of Dr. Wong here, so that he can make sure that you're not going to feel worse. He's going to make sure that when you're pulling heavy metals out into the bloodstream, that they're not going into another part of the body. So with me, I work virtually. So I work from my home, and I work as a health coach actually in this capacity. So I can work across state lines and national lines. About a third of all of my folks are in the EU and beyond.
Cool.
And so everything that I use is natural. So I'm using a lot of herbal stuff, a lot of
Yeah.
binders in order to pull a lot of that stuff out. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's fine to do it with the other components as long as you're in appropriate hands. And with everything, I always say start low and go slow.
Yeah, I like that
Body
too.
likes
Again, it's
small
about opening up
changes.
the detox pathway. That's a big message from this session, I think, is open up the detox pathways before detoxing, it sounds like here. Yes, thank you, Chris, for the comment too. A lot of people on here also have CFS and ME, and that's also kind of a, there's some attention to it, but maybe this is not really recognized in conventional medicine that much. It's kind of like, oh, well, like you said, go have a SSRI, or this is kind of like this chronic fatigue is sort of like, I think a lot of doctors don't know what to do with it. Um,
Absolutely. Well, and you mentioned, like if you actually want an official diagnosis, you've got to have a certain criteria at 6 months, where
yeah,
you've had it for 6 months. And I just don't believe in that. And there's a lot of people who are really sick and have chronic fatigue and other mystery symptoms, and they don't qualify, and so they don't get a diagnosis. Now unfortunately, even if you get a diagnosis, you're not going to get helped, because in the conventional system they're like, well, you just need to rest, and there's very low chance of you getting disability for it anyway. And so like
yeah,
it's really unfortunate.
great. Thank you for all those questions, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Hirsch, for all these answers. We have a couple more minutes. I want to respect everyone's time here. I want to try to get to as many questions as we can. Carla has two questions. One is about red light in general, red light therapy. So she bought a high-end red light therapy system. Carla, feel free if you'd like to type in which red light therapy system you bought here. Didn't experience any change after 2 months of daily use. She's had some fatigue for years, is what she's saying. Any thoughts on red light therapy?
So the red light therapy, it's interesting. I actually just did a whole bunch of research on this because my wife wants to try it out, and so we're gonna
Okay.
we're gonna order one. We're gonna order
Yeah.
the platinum system. Oh, you got a Mito, okay? So it can come with a combination of different kinds of light. So there's the near infrared, and then you can get a combination of the near, the far, and the mid.
Okay.
So when you're doing the near, it's mainly for skin and for muscles. So it's not for deep detoxification. That's the far infrared, which is what you're going to get in a lot of the saunas.
Mhm.
So you might get a little bit of mitochondrial health improvement by doing the red light therapy, but generally it's not the place that you want to go if you have fatigue. It's not what I recommend to people. You're going to
It's
want
like a
more of a
Band-Aid for
sauna.
somebody. Yeah, I mean, unless there's like light deficiency and they're just not getting outside or something, you know. I mean, light is a nutrient. I mean, I kind of call it vitamin L, you know, it's kind of like just like you need that light to activate the mitochondria. So yeah, that's interesting. You know, let me know after if you get the platinum, and sounds like you might get the platinum. So let me know how you find that. Yeah,
Yeah,
great.
will do.
Okay, and also, she would like to know, and probably others too, cost of your program and things like that. I don't know if you want to talk about it here, or we can send people to your website. Whatever you'd like to do is fine.
So there's a number of different programs that I have. There are some that include one-on-ones, groups. I've got a health coach, a nervous system retraining coach. And so really to determine whether or not we're a great fit, it's to get on a call with a member of our team
Like
to
a free
see,
call, like a
yeah,
discovery
free
call.
call. Yeah,
Okay,
free call
yeah,
to see,
cool.
no
That's a
obligation, and
great
hopefully we
offer.
can
Yeah,
provide you some clarity. And
yeah,
if we feel like you're a good fit, great. If not, we'll send you elsewhere.
yeah. Great, thank you. What is the connection between? Oh, this is good. So if someone doesn't have a thyroid because they had a thyroidectomy, either from a benign tumor or a thyroid cancer or whatnot, what is the connection between treating the adrenals and cortisol levels when one does not have a thyroid?
So when somebody's had a thyroidectomy, sometimes there's still a little bit of tissue left that you can revive. But regardless, you still need to boost the adrenals and boost the mitochondria to improve thyroid function, because it's not just about the amount of thyroid that's being produced by the gland. It's also about getting the thyroid into the cell, and then
Mm.
the relationship between the thyroid hormone and the adrenal hormones and the sex hormones in this beautiful dance that then allows so many different components of um, of the body to function appropriately.
The hormone tango, right? Basically.
The hormone tango, I love it.
Do you have any lifestyle recommendations? Okay, well, this is kind of maybe yeah, this is a very broad question, but lifestyle recommendations for how to fill in the deficiencies on adrenal mitochondria, supplements, foods, and things. So there's a lot there, but I don't know if you could give maybe one top thing you found with adrenals and mitochondria that might be helpful in terms of
You're
food.
talking about in terms of lifestyle habits?
It looks like it's a just a yeah, it's really a pretty broad question here, but lifestyle, like there's like three parts to that question, but lifestyle, supplements, or foods. I mean that's basically your program, I guess. But what are your top picks for foods? I kind of want to know about that. We have a lot of nutritional interests here too. So what are your kind of top good foods for mitochondria? And I'm assuming they're not processed packaged foods, you know, mac and cheese and stuff like that. So
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll go ahead and answer the question, and then I do have to hop off to another call.
great. Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, for me, it's all, it's mainly a plant-based diet. If I do recommend consuming meat, but it doesn't have to be every day.
Mhm.
But it's more about what you're not consuming.
Mm.
So what you're not consuming is going to be gluten and dairy and sugar.
Avoiding toxic foods, essentially, right? Because those.
Exactly, avoiding
Got it.
toxic foods. Yeah.
Um, Dr. Evan, thank you so much. So good to reconnect with you again, and I'll email you afterwards too and chat more. But it's so great to see you, and thank you for spending time with us and our CH community here. Hope you're well. Hope your family is doing well, and we'll talk soon.
Likewise.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, my friend. Thanks for having me on. Bye,
Thank you.
everybody.
All right. Thanks so much.